So when you apply for a job, you have a resume, right? And then that's just a normal thing. But so many different people have different ways of putting it together, right? If you're applying for a design agency, maybe you have your headshot. Maybe you have, I know people in HR just like, don't have your headshot. That could be discrimination and this and that. Like, don't include it. Like, HR doesn't like looking at ones with headshots. But obviously, some get more design work than others. And if you're an agency, your website is your resume. That's what people see when they want to work with you. So take me through it. Why have a resume? What's the importance of a resume? Is it an outdated format for applying? Should we just go in with like looking at people's LinkedIn or a more personal touch? Or should it stay with like, no, APA format, Chicago, give us the highlights, 1 to 3 pages, nothing less? What are your thoughts?
Well, I mean, you have to set it in Times New Roman or it doesn't really count as
Ah,
a
yes.
resume, right? Yeah. So, but the reality is that like resumes are one of those things that I think is an artifact in our collective consciousness that like when we say resume, we immediately think like Times New Roman, black and white, it lists like it has to list education, it has to list all the jobs that you've had, it has to like it feels like there are a lot of things that have to be around it or it's wrong.
Mm,
And, maybe in some fields that's true. Like, if you're a lawyer, there's probably a pretty, strict standard on what they expect from resumes. And if you like, go outside that bubble, you're not safe. But the reality is that a resume is a communication tool. You're
mm,
someone who is looking to be employed by a company, whether that's freelance work or get a job, but more often than not, it's get a job is why you have a resume. Um,
mm,
and you're communicating to them that these are the skills that I have, and this is how I match up for this role that you have. So, like, you want that resume is doing that job, and you have to make sure that it is communicating that in the best way possible. Like
yeah.
resumes, um, the concept of a resume is it's really more about content than it is about a particular format, honestly. Because think
Mm,
about it. When you go to apply for jobs today, more often than not, you're entering in your resume information into fields. Like they're asking, like, what's your experience? What's your, and you're kind of breaking down your resume because that structures the format for the hiring manager.
yeah.
But, more often than not, like you have a document that is your resume that you're sending along as well. So it's kind of like a little bit of both when you're building a resume. So you have to make sure that the content, the written word in your resume is strong, and you also need to make sure that your resume, the document that you send, if it's a PDF or a Word doc, that it's going to communicate clearly what it needs to be and what it needs to do.
I for a lot of my professional career to this point, I haven't needed the most robust resume, usually because I've known somebody or whatever, and they knew enough about me that the job was, yeah, if you wanted it, it's yours kind of thing. But still had to have something when going through HR and, everything else, the whole cover letter thing. My question there, last time I put it together, I remember I was really stressing out because I was like, how do I put all this experience on one page? And someone in my life's like, who said it needs to be one page? And I was like,
Exactly.
oh, this is, you just blew my mind. Like, but then at the same point, right, coming from the design perspective, I'll tell my non-designer friends, I feel like the logo of a company, the brand is the hardest thing. And everyone's like, you're kidding. It's like 2 colors, some geometrical shapes. How is that hard? And I'm like, you're condensing and compressing all of this information, all this look and this feel of a company down into these 2 or 3 colors and very simple shapes. And it's supposed to tell, maybe not tell an entire story, but there's a look and the feel of a brand and everything goes behind that. That's what's on the flag. And a
Hmm.
resume is kind of like that. I mean, it's your brand. And I
Yeah.
think there's some merit, maybe if it's not one page, but to being able to say, I mean, when people are looking through it, they're not going to see 50 pages of stuff. So, how do you put something together that at a high level, if people are going through hundreds of resumes, you have something that catches people's eye and stands out? I don't know if it's just the UX, right? Just the design of the resume, or if it's just the content up top that you're making sure you need to know 3 things about me, 1, 2, 3. Everything else, okay, now I gotta keep reading more about this resume. So, I don't know, well, is it a mix of the 2? Do you need a is design with when it comes to resumes overrated? Like, how how do you get people's attention, say a lot without saying much at all?
So, first off, yeah, I mean, I'm a designer at heart, a visual designer. I love that. I think that visual design drives just about everything, and I think that on your resume, the visual design also drives it. However, whenever I say that the design drives it, that doesn't necessarily mean that it has to be some kind of over the top, like huge headshot, lots of graphics, fancy fonts, things like that. I think about it whenever I think about like illustrators and illustration styles. Okay. Like let's talk about like comic strip artists. You know, Bill Watterson, who did Calvin and Hobbes, did beautiful watercolor comic strips with like beautiful landscapes and really like got in there. And a Calvin and Hobbes strip, a Sunday strip, later in his career when he had the clout to get the space that he wanted, they were pieces of art. They were comic strips, but they were pieces of art, and there was a distinct style to it. But you compare that against like Peanuts by Charles Schultz, and you don't think of Charles Schultz as having a art style, because Peanuts is so like the lines are very like you know uh, the same width. There's not really it doesn't hit you over the head with the illustration. The fact that it's an illustration really falls into the background of what he does. And when it comes to
Mm,
resumes, you have to weigh that balance between being like, do you want your resume that you've crafted to be a work of art, or do you want it to be a piece that kind of, or do you want the design to sit back and let the content come forward? And that's kind of a good balance.
yeah.
Personally, I think that making the content shine should be the point of a resume. You want to make sure that the content that's in there is being communicated to what the priorities are of the hiring manager. And
Mhm.
so, like your resume, you should be sculpting it towards what that hiring manager is looking for. Like, so whatever is written in the job position, try to sculpt it towards that position. Now, that can be challenging because a lot of people, whenever they write up like job postings, they
Yeah.
really include like everything in the kitchen sink. It's like, oh, well, we also want you to drive a box truck and, move, do all of these other things. And in addition to like the design and the UX and the research and the content strategy that you do. Um, and there's also a case of focusing at the right point in your career, like, and what content goes in your resume. So for instance, like I really like hiring early career people. I like
Mm,
to find people who have a wealth of talent and who I see have a good and like a good I'm trying to think a good potential, and help them grow. I very much that's something that I like to do. And people who are early in their career don't necessarily have as much to list on their resume.
mm,
Um, and so I would tell people who are early in their career to focus on what they've learned at their jobs, and how that could apply. So, for instance, if you've got somebody who's just out of like a boot camp or just out of college who doesn't have like any previous like UX or design experience on their resume, like they have experience doing
mm,
like campus jobs or, working summer times, for their family or whatever, or for like businesses, or maybe like working their way through college and being able to manage this time management. There's a lot there that can show like
mm.
I'm a valuable person and I'm looking to grow. I'm early in my career, help me with that. And
Yeah.
so like those early career people can really like can focus on those learnings. The mid-career people, the people who are like, maybe like, somewhere 3 to 5 years into their career, that's when you start focusing on the results that you made, the tasks that you have. Like instead of saying, "Hey, I used Figma to make a million prototypes," talk about what needles got moved. Like
Mm,
I contributed design work that improved efficiency, that got us a like 15%, um, 15% more signups or 15% more users, or try to
Mm,
find those metrics where you can. And if you can't, try to get if you can't get quantitative data, get qualitative data. Like,
yeah.
if your boss said, "Hey, this is really good. I'm really happy with this result. It's super smooth," or like your handoff to developers was way better than anyone else's, like find those little places to brag that show, how you were able to achieve um, good results, either within the team or for the team. So I talked about early career and mid career, late career. That's where you want to start seeing how you are able to delegate
Mm,
and elevate others. You are accountable for things. Like I right now in my role as creative director, I am accountable for a wealth of things at Four Kitchens. Um, but while I'm accountable, I'm not necessarily the person working on it, and I'm usually not the best person to work on it.
yeah.
Like I'm a project lead for an open source project called Emulsify. Listen, the engineers have a much better idea of what they're doing than I do. And so like when you're later in your career, you want to focus on showing that like, I led the team that did this. I was able to like, my team members like grew like from X to Y. Like, I'm sorry, I'm just having a hard time thinking of specific examples. But basically, you want to just show, how your leadership impacted the organization and impacted the people who were on your team. Like, one of the things
Mm,
that, eh, if you'll indulge me with a tangent, when it comes to leadership, I firmly believe that the employees of a company are the most valuable part of a company because they have institutional knowledge. They execute on what needs to be done, and when they are empowered and motivated, they make the company better. And when they are disenfranchised, they are a drag on the company. And
mm,
I firmly believe that one of the things that a leader should do is focus on, their team and making sure that their team is happy. And that's something that,
mm,
when you want to show that off in a resume, that shows like good things, like, um, you know, like what's your turnover like? What's your was it 360 reviews look like? You know, like do people love being on your team? Do people like that sort of thing? And you want
yeah.
to demonstrate these sorts of things.
When you're crafting the resume and you want to highlight all of these points, there's one section up top that I've always hated. And I've always hated putting it together for myself. I've hated reading other people's. This section feels like Chat GPT before Chat GPT. And that's the executive summary right up top, that bio that says, I drive results. I am passionate about X. I am efficient with Y. It's even if you make it sound less clunky, you're probably using a bunch of adverbs. And if you're farther along in your career, maybe there's something up top that says, I've done this, I did this, I did this. If you're younger, it's just, I'm passionate and ready to learn. That's pretty much like what anyone wants to hear or see or read up top with that section. But really, when you're crafting your resume, like highlight for me what needs to be in there besides just the executive summary. What all should live in this document?
That is the bane of everyone trying to write that executive summary because you want
Yeah.
to write
I'm
just
like,
the
I'm gonna put
right
everything else
thing.
together first, and that's the end.
And yeah, and that's it is such an opportunity, that executive summary. And while it is intimidating and it is a pain to work on, that's a place where when people are skimming your resume, it gives you a chance to summarize like, and give a hook for like who you are. So, like for instance, like my hook is, for like resumes is like I want to make the digital world as easy and intuitive as the real world.
Mm,
Okay? Like that's
mhm,
that's my that's the thing that motivates me. And like it doesn't necessarily summarize, I mean, it neatly summarizes everything I do, but it's not a checklist. And it's also not like I don't think it's trite. Maybe it is. But I think like that's an opportunity. That summary is an opportunity to infuse personality and to convey who you are. And that is that can feel risky. And the reason that it feels risky is if you make it too specific and too like maybe like on the nose or too much personality,
Mm,
that you might push some people away.
mm,
And so what happens is people generally try to like make it like generic and appealing and all encompassing. And what happens is it gets kind of watered down and it's not interesting and it's not a good hook. It's like, oh, I'm a dad and creative director and, I love board games. Like, it's like great. Like no one cares. There's like it adds a little bit of personality, but having the generic thing doesn't work. But if you say like,
yeah.
um, like I don't know, like for instance, one of the things that I've always considered adding on mine is, I love asshole clients. Like that's something I've considered putting on there because like it conveys very quickly that I mean I don't enjoy working with bad clients or tough clients, but I'm really good at it and
Mm,
like I excel at it. And so whenever there's an opportunity to help out with that, like that's what I do,
yeah.
And so that tells that communicates, if I use that as my executive summary, that would communicate
Mm,
very quickly, like,
yeah.
but it would also push people away because I would use the word like asshole in there. Um,
Right.
I, I as a person, I swear a lot, and it's the way I go. Anyway, I was interviewing for a job at marketing agency before I joined Four Kitchens, and I made sure that whenever I was making my presentation to like all the hiring people or showing off the design work that they had me do, I made sure to slip in a couple of swear words to see their reaction because I'm like, if this place doesn't let me say like some bad words occasionally, it's not going to be a good fit for them. It's not going to be a good fit for me.
Mm,
So.
mhm. Yeah. I mean, that's just such a and I feel like that's such I don't feel like it's a reality. It's an amazing marketing tactic for yourself is to go out there
Mhm.
and companies do it all the time. They try to find, well, who are our people? And the more you can put out a certain level of authenticity matched with professionalism, right? You weren't just up there swearing. You
Yes.
were up there demonstrating expertise. You had a slide deck or you had a presentation to go through, but you were yourself through it. There was value
Mhm.
to it. And so that's really important. And so when it comes to the look of this thing, how do you make it feel like you? Right. And you said it up top, like, oh, it's got to have, like, you said you heard it here first. According to Randy, always swear in your resumes, the most important thing you
Yes.
can do.
Absolutely.
On a more serious note, though, how can people who don't swear a lot, right? Everybody else, how do
Mhm.
we put together something that says, just like a logo, this is my personal brand and
Mhm.
articulate that well. So, how should this thing look and feel?
So you know, everyone has a personal brand. The question is how like are you intentional about it? Are you maintaining it? Because everything that you put out there on the internet that people can find, people will look at and evaluate, and in aggregate, it's your brand. If I
Mm,
search for someone who a resume comes in, I search for that person, I find their Twitter, their Instagram, their TikTok, their blog that they haven't written, post for in 4 years, and I can see what they put out into the world, and all of that in aggregate starts to build up what that brand is.
yeah.
And in the resume, like I personally think that everyone who is in the design and UX and content strategy worlds needs to have a little bit of personal branding. And that means having an opinion about who you are and what you deliver.
Mm,
So when it comes to the visuals should be in sync with what your value is and what you deliver. So like if you're someone who likes to wear a tie to work and likes to like be in an office setting, as a designer. I mean, they exist. uh, you know, Make sure that you've got a very clean looking resume that matches the professionalism that you have. If you're a bit more of like a wild card designer who like, just kind of like throws a bunch of paint on the walls and, comes up with great ideas, but you're really messy, like let that speak through your resume. Not that the resume should be messy, but that
Mm,
it should communicate that like you are not a buttoned up professional. You are a creative person who takes like long circular paths to get to where you're going. And that
mm,
communicates who you are. And you can do it visually, you know, um, by, you know, using visual design and, using geometric shapes or patterns or photos or things like that. But generally, you want resumes to be very scannable. Like
mm,
as a hiring manager, when I have a position open, I get a lot of applicants and I don't have a lot of time to look at everyone's resume. So I need to kind of like skim it for interesting things. And so you need to make it formatted so that I can skim it for interesting things.
yeah.
I like provide like make sure the emphasis is on the right syllable, like, don't think about how like you grew up thinking resume should be. Think about what your resume is including. Like,
Mm,
so for instance, one of the things that I like to see on resumes or that like I recommend to people is if you can actually put the logos for the companies that you worked on um in the resume. Like if you're in our field, one of the things that's very important is like, what logos have you worked on? Like what companies have you done work for?
yeah.
Like, if you've like worked for companies where the logo's recognizable, like, if you were a designer at Target for a while or CVS, add those logos to your resume and that will strengthen your position because it's something that the hiring manager is going to recognize.
Mhm,
If that's not the case, but you've worked on brands that people will recognize, then like, have like little tiny versions of the logos. Like, I worked as a senior designer at agency and then just add like little tiny logos of like some of the companies that people might recognize, because what you're trying to do with your resume is get attention. And so like that's one trick to get attention.
yeah.
The other trick to get attention is strong copywriting and making sure that you are using an active voice, not a passive one. Like I did design work for Yale. That's passive voice. You know, Instead say like, designed a blank for Yale. I mean, obviously it would be better with results too, but like, you need to use an active voice and you want to try and make it succinct and sync up with what's expected. Um,
Yeah.
one of the things that I do not like to see on resumes is when someone lists out like just kind of like a bullet list of skills because they're fearful that someone's going to be like, oh, they need to open Photoshop every 3 months. They didn't list Photoshop. I'm not going to hire this person. They're fearful that they haven't listed the right like apps.
Mm,
When the reality is that what at least I look at as a hiring manager is what comparable skills and experience do they have that can like match up with what I want. Like I want to know that they were able to create do something super efficiently or do something super fast or like win an award or like one of the one of so I mentioned earlier I like difficult clients. One of the things that I like to talk about whenever I talk to like potential clients or like if I was going through an interview process would be like I had a particularly difficult client where there were many different groups that were fighting each other that had different priorities. And like the project itself, I will not share that design work because that design work is, well, it's as good as it could have been. But
yeah.
the success there was getting all of those departments to come to an agreement and not only be satisfied, but be delighted with the direction that things were going.
Mm,
Because like we had like there was editorial and there was advertising and there was the executives and there were the conference like admins, and they all had different priorities for the website and they all conflicted. And
mm,
so like one of the things that you want to do is like tell those stories, because dealing with tough clients is part of the job. It's like, yes, you can visually design. I will look at your portfolio to see the visual designs, but communicate to me. Tell me, like, in this position, I like corralled angry cats on this project.
These are firemen.
Sometimes you
Get
have to
out of
be
the
a
tree. We're trying
firefighter.
to save your life.
Yeah.
Oh man, they're like, oh, he got up in trees and got the cats down. That is the fireman we need. None of us want to climb those trees. Hire him. When you something else you had mentioned when you were on that when we were talking about in this last segment, you brought up bringing in logos for companies you've worked for, brands that are recognizable. So I just brought on a videographer last week, and something that really stood out to me in his resume is he had a link to his portfolio. Really, really happy the link worked, by the way. I mean, that's
Oh, yeah.
always the worst when they've got a digital PDF with
Hmm.
a link that you have to copy paste. So,
Hmm.
anyway, so I clicked on that, went to his website, and it was funny because I had to go and, I was going to review this with my team. But immediately when I seen his portfolio, everyone else, I mean, people might have been a lot better than he was. But just because I could visually see his portfolio and what he was about, because again, videographer, you're not going to put all these videos in your resume. Went to his website, saw a lot of different photo shoots and video work he's done. I'm like, oh, that's done. He's hired right there. And my team's like, oh, we want to see. I'm like, well, here you go. And they're like, oh yeah, he's hired. Cool. Like, and but just by adding that link, he went to the top of the list and was immediately
Hmm.
hired. So
Yeah.
take me through that. Like, is that something you recommend for folks is to include hyperlinks? Or does it, the seeing this big blue link somewhere, this ugly thing in the resume, does it detract from the design and something that maybe isn't worth putting in? Maybe a QR code suffices. I don't know. What do you think?
I think that any affordance you can make to make it easier for the hiring manager is worth doing.
Hmm.
So, like, if you have a link in your resume, like, www.yourname.com, that should be a link that goes to that website. You've got an email address, it should open up that email address. It should be as interactive as possible, and it's pretty easy to do that within PDFs,
Yeah.
either in PDF editing software or the original tools that are creating the PDF. And like, if there's some weird visualness to it, um, you know, you have to try and design around that. Like, for instance, if you have, like, your contact information and you've got big blue portfolio link and big blue email link, go in and style them differently. Figure out how what you have to do to get it to look good.
Hmm.
Because it's those small, for me, it's the small little details that will make or break someone. Like, I am as a hiring manager, I am both very forgiving and very strict on certain things. So, for instance, like, I hire a lot of, like, visual designers, and in my experience, visual designers, you know, I mean, the good ones are very strong writers, but I don't anticipate them having, you know, super strong writing skills. What I do anticipate is that they um, spell check their documents.
Mm.
Like,
Okay. Yeah.
like I will, depending on what level the person is, like, I will sometimes forgive if they use the wrong there, or your, because I'm like, some people just really aren't good at that sort of thing, and I'm hiring them for their visual skills, not for their writing. Um, uh, although I've got separate things about that. But if something is misspelled, that is an easy catch with spell check.
Yeah.
And if you're trying to get a job, that is something that should be caught. If it can be caught by a tool, you should absolutely, like, do it. And in recent years, with AI getting the way that it is, I think the next round of hiring I have, I'm not going to be as forgiving about, like, their and their, and your, because, like, there are so many tools for improving writing that are easily accessible, that, like, should really do it. Should make sure that, like, it's written as best as possible. That attention to detail in your resume and cover letter has to like come. That's one of the things that comes through. It's the
Mhm.
difference between having a good resume and having a great resume. It's like those little details that you sweat.
Take me through the software then, because I personally love Canva right now for if someone were to come up and say they're wanting to completely as they're listening to this podcast and they want to rethink how they're doing their resume and the content they have on there. Well, Canva has so many templates to get you started, right? Like, I don't think you need to copy and paste because ultimately, right, like you run the risk of having a resume that looks exactly like another applicant if it's a top pick design, but tweak it and play with it, get it started.
Mhm.
That's just something that I've done in the past to, have something that feels really sleek and clean without needing to bring in a professional designer. But what are your thoughts there? Because you are a professional designer. So when I
Mhm.
say the word Canva, do you just internally die a little, or what are your thoughts?
I mean, Canva in general, I don't have much experience with it. I don't have any hate for it. It's democratizing good design. Like, it. I mean, it's commoditizing it to a large degree, but at the same time, it's raising the bar in a way that's very accessible for people.
Mm,
Being able to like, I need a resume. I'm going to log into Canva. I'm going to find a resume template that I like, and I'm going to modify it. That is way better than before Canva when people were putting it together in Word and it looked
yeah,
terrible. Even no matter how much you tried, it still looked terrible.
yeah,
So it's good. Um, it's for me as a hiring manager. Whenever I have like tasks for somebody to get done, I care less about specifically how they're doing it and more that it's getting done. So for instance, like, um, if a designer put together their, resume and Canva, well, they're still making design decisions because it's not about
mm,
the tool, it's about that person's expertise.
yeah,
So now, the same, the same may like it may influence like hiring decisions. It's like, oh, this guy's a great or this person is a great designer, but they only use Canva and they don't use
mm,
Figma or they don't use, Adobe products. It's like, then it's going to be like, hey, let's talk about what this role entails because, maybe that's acceptable for the role. Maybe it's not. It depends on what kind of work that you're doing. I know I've talked with some of my peers, and some clients have started requesting Canva templates for their staff to work with. Uh,
yeah,
Now, kind of bringing this back around to more tooling about like resumes is that like remember that you can work on it in multiple like places. Like maybe Canva is where you do your magic, or maybe you lay out your own thing in Adobe InDesign or Figma or what have you. You can always take that text and put that text into some kind of text editor to make sure that run spell check on it,
mm,
and using like some of the modern writing tools like Writer.io or Grammarly, or I think like Google Docs is starting to get like some AI checks, and we'll check like grammar. Though you just copy and paste the text into there and run those checks, and then make sure that everything is good in the resume itself.
well, we spent most of this podcast to this point talking about the design, but now I want to talk
Hmm.
about the good company for a second because
Yeah.
all the thoughts you talked earlier, the importance of having an opinion when you put yourself out there, all the opinions you shared today. Let's talk about the good company here. Is there anyone that's inspired you or helped you when it comes to rethinking how resumes should be, or anyone you've looked to when it came to guidance? Well, for hey, I mean, and that's a pretty stressful situation for a lot of people saying, especially if you're in a boat where you're like, I need a job. I'm afraid to be me, but I know I got to be me to a degree. How do I do that? Did you have anyone that gave you any insight, support, help, mentorship?
So whenever it comes to these sorts of things, not very many people outside of HR really focus on those sorts of things. Like a lot of design and UX and content strategy, like managers, this is something that they do irregularly. It's not something that they skill up on. And it's
Mm.
something that basically they kind of copy what everyone else has done.
Yeah.
And you have mediocre job postings that
Yep.
get responded to with mediocre resumes because no one is actually focusing on it.
Mhm.
What changed my perspective on it and really, I think, upped my game as a hiring manager for writing job postings,
Mm.
and advising people whenever they were writing resumes was, I had a brief conversation with Jared Spool, the big time UXer. Went to like a day long expo in Chicago, where he was talking. And one of the things that he talked about was, hiring people and how like that process is like misaligned. And the misalignment is that, people are posting like what skills they have. Like, I know Photoshop, I know Illustrator, I know Figma. Um, and what they're not doing is they're talking about the achievements that they actually had, because
Mm.
hiring managers don't want someone who knows Photoshop or Illustrator. They want someone who can do the work that they need, which is like creating a visual design for a website. Like, does it really matter what app it's in, or does it matter that they're getting, a website designed? And so, in talking to Jared Spool, I asked him some more questions about that, and basically digging in. And when you write a job posting, you should be posting the challenges and the tasks that they'll be doing. Like, in your first year, you will be, doing X, Y, and Z,
Mhm.
and that way people can respond with, well, I've done X and Y and I have an appetite for Z,
Yeah.
as opposed to like just having skill lists. And so Jared Swoll has written a lot about hiring, both from the perspective of people who are looking for jobs and the perspective of hiring managers. And his writings on that, um, have dramatically improved me as a hiring manager. So,
Mm.
and by helping me as a hiring manager make my like job postings more specific, it helps me get better employees because they're able to see exactly what challenges they're going to have, and to understand that like they want to take on those challenges.
Yeah. Well, I know the next time I need a job, I know who to go to for help when it comes to designing my resume.
Mm.
For the folks who are listening today and they want to learn more about you. They want to learn more about Four Kitchens and what y'all do over there because this podcast is cool. And so Four Kitchens must be cool. Where do people go?
Sure. Well, first of all, Four Kitchens is very cool. Four Kitchens, you can find more about us at the website fourkitchens.com. All one word, no hyphen. And you can check out the website. We've got a blog where we talk about all of the different kinds of like work and thoughts that we have. We have our insights page where we've got case studies for the work that we've done. And Yeah, I'd love to hear from anyone who's having any like resume questions. I'm always happy to help.
And where do they find you?
Oh, me? So they can find me, honestly, if they just send me an email, randy@fourkitchens.com. That would probably be the best. I'm on social media just about everywhere as Amazing Rando. That's
Nice.
my handle across the internet. Um, I used to be very active on Twitter, but I've retired it now that it's
Twitter's retired.
X.
It's called
Yes.
X. Yeah.
I'm also fairly active on LinkedIn, so you can
Okay.
check me out there too.
We got to get connected on LinkedIn. I don't know if we are. We should be. We might not be
I
though. We
I
need to be
don't
sure
know.
we are.
I'm trying to get a good habit of like, if I'm in a meeting with someone to connect with LinkedIn, but
Yeah, I it's one of those things like I'll look 6 months from now and be like, "Oh, we never connected and we're actual friends." There's all these other people that I've seen once that we've connected with, but we're actual friends. We need to connect. Anyway, well, Randy, this episode was awesome. For folks, you know what to do. At the bottom of this podcast, there's a description with all the links you need to go follow Randy for Kitchens. Hey, and if you like Design and Good Company, well, subscribe so you never miss an episode. You got it here on the audio only version. Or if you're checking out YouTube, be sure to hit that like and subscribe so you get the clips and everything else. All right, that's the end of this call to action. This has been Design and Good Company, and we'll see y'all again in a couple of weeks for the next episode. Take care.